Boom! The courtroom fell dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Then gasps erupted around the room like flames. And all at once, in that charged moment, the exquisitely crafted reality of Kody and Robyn Brown started to unravel. That's how the explosive news of Garrison Brown's hidden life unraveled in court. Nobody was expecting it. Not the viewers who had been watching the Sister Wives drama for years. Not the relatives in the audience. And definitely not Kody and Robyn, who had spent several years holding on to their version of the truth. The proof was irrefutable. The revelations were explosive, and the whole edifice of the Brown family was soon going to be rocked like never before. Before we go to the proof, let's go back and figure out how this whole thing started. The Brown family, once being a poster child of plural marriage bliss, had already been falling apart for several years. Christine had left, Janelle had moved away, and Meri had been discarded. And throughout all the drama, Kody and Robyn stuck together, holding on for dear life to their title as the real couple remaining. But in private, the tensions were building. Garrison, one of Kody's sons from Janelle, had always felt rejected. He broke with Kody during the pandemic, attacking him as a hypocrite and a favorite spellier who ignored him. Fans will never forget the heart-wrenching moments when Garrison complained about how little Kody tried to reach out to him as compared to Robyn's children. The tension never dissipated. It intensified, and now in the courtroom, Garrison's reality was finally being uttered, not in hushed tones, but in irrefutable proof. The courtroom lights were harsh, the air tense, but the theater that was about to unfold did not start there. No, this storm had been building for years. Behind the doors of a once harmonious family, behind the heart of a polygamous family that the world once called wonderful, and behind the crevices that grew with each season of Sister Wives. To comprehend the bombshell of Garrison Brown's double life unfolding in court, you must first comprehend the broken, cracked family that led us here. And that begins many years before the evidence. Before the gasps in the courtroom, it begins with the gradual disintegration of the Brown family. Kody Brown was once a man who was bigger than life. TLC billed him as the proud patriarch of a new polygamous family, bold, charming, and willing to prove to the world that plural marriage could be a viable option. 4 wives, 18 kids, one vision of harmony. That was the product. That was the program. That was the fantasy. But behind the cameras, favoritism, neglect, and jealousy were already rotting the foundation. The wives, Meri, Janelle, Christine, and eventually Robyn, battled behind closed doors for Kody's attention, and the children frequently took a back seat to his changing affections. What was sold as equality was far from it. This strain laid the groundwork for all that would eventually come crashing down in court. The initial break came when Christine Brown finally said enough. Christine, who had been the emotional glue of the family for years, raising children, keeping spirits up, and putting up with Kody's growing fixation on Robyn. But all glues have a time when they get brittle and break. Christine's departure was not merely a marital split, but a public rejection of the family structure. She revealed what fans had long guessed, that Kody no longer treated his wives equally. Christine admitted to feeling unloved, unseen, and dismissed. Her exit caused shockwaves within the family and the fandom. Overnight, the Brown dream seemed like a nightmare. And although Christine was empowered by being able to walk away, the children, particularly the older ones such as Garrison, saw firsthand what favoritism was accomplishing to their mothers. Then there was Janelle Brown, Garrison's mother. Unlike Christine, Janelle was quieter about her pain. She focused on her children, on building independence, on surviving in a family where her voice carried little weight. Janelle and Garrison's relationship was close. He deferred to her as the stable, dependable parent when Kody was gone. But that passive suffering at the hands of Kody's neglect was not lost on her children. Garrison, especially, internalized a lot of that angst. He saw his mother being pushed aside, while Robyn's family appeared to reap privileges and attention. This invisible wound, one that was transmitted from mother to son, deepened year by year. And when the courtroom moment finally came, it had made of Garrison a man who would not permit deceits to go unchallenged. Let us not forget Meri Brown, the original wife who long since had been relegated to the background. Once Kody's legal spouse, Meri was progressively marginalized until she was relegated to family onlooker status. Her humiliation went on public display. Kody freely confessed that he no longer felt close to her. He talked of their marriage as though it was a weight he wanted to wipe from his existence. Meri hung on, year after year, for scraps of attention that never came back. For the children, including Garrison, Meri's plight was another example of how their father failed to nurture relationships unless it suited him. The favoritism toward Robyn wasn't just about romance. It was about rewriting the entire family order. And then of course there was Garrison Brown, the woman who entered the family later, became Kody's legal wife, and quickly rose to the position of favorite. To everyone else, Robyn came across as sweet and tearful, usually weeping about family conflict. But within the family she existed as a disruption to the balance. Time, money, and love were disproportionately channeled her direction. Her children came to monopolize Kody's time, leaving the rest to fight for scraps of attention. Garrison, blunt and self-reliant, could not turn a blind eye to what he saw. To him, Robyn represented the wedge that pushed the family together, not so much because of her as an individual, but because of the way Kody placed her on a pedestal above everyone else. That favoritism incited the bitterness that had smoldered for decades, eventually turning into the proof that shocked the courtroom. If cracks existed prior, the COVID-19 pandemic made them canyons. Kody had strict, near-strangling rules that were unevenly applied to households. Garrison, in his 20s and struggling for autonomy, fought hard with his father. He criticized Kody for employing the pandemic as a cover to quarantine with Robyn's family and disregard the others. Audiences recall the shouting matches, the crying, the agony of the confessionals. But what they didn't see were the permanent wounds. Garrison felt more isolated than ever. He thought his dad picked one home and left the others behind, and that betrayal never healed. This wasn't merely a father-son disagreement. This was the point of contention in a relationship that had long been starved of love and fairness. Despite all this turmoil, Kody and Robyn worked hard to maintain a polished public image. In interviews and on social media, they insisted the family was just experiencing growing pains. They painted Christine's departure as a personal choice, not a systemic failure. They downplayed Janelle's distance and Meri's heartbreak. But Garrison was smarter than that. The children were smarter than that. And fans, forever attuned, started to connect the dots. Internet chat rooms hummed with speculation over favoritism, budget disparities, and emotional damage to the older children. By the time the courtroom theatrics rolled around, the public was ready. They were ready for verification, and Garrison's testimony provided just that. Where does Garrison belong in this broken image? As a young man stepping into adulthood, he refused to let his father's narrative erase his experiences. He began keeping records, conversations, financial notes, private reflections. Not because he wanted to attack his family, but because he wanted the truth preserved. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment of favoritism, it all mattered. Garrison knew one day it might need to be revealed. And he was right. His determination was not born of resentment, but of survival. In a household where silence sometimes meant erasure, he determined to be a keeper of the truth. And that choice would come back to haunt Kody and Robyn. By the time Christine had departed, Janelle had checked out, and Meri had faded into a ghost. The Brown family was already in shambles. But Kody still held on to his reality. He still believed he was in charge. That Robyn wasn't a favorite, that the children were dramatizing. Behind the scenes, however, the frustrations of the children intensified. Garrison especially started expressing his ire more vocally. He did not care anymore about accommodating his father. He demanded honesty. He demanded responsibility. And when rumors started spreading that legal issues could bring family secrets to light, Garrison realized the moment had arrived. His proof, his documents, his reality, everything he had silently stored away, was soon going to emerge. The setup for the bombshell. And that brings us full circle to where this tale started. The courtroom. By the time Garrison's hidden life was revealed, the family wasn't merely split, it was shattered. The fissures that started with favoritism, widened by neglect, and deepened by abandonment had expanded into massive holes. The family who used to sell harmony now became characterized by dysfunction, and the son who used to keep silent had become the truth teller who could no longer be silenced. The evidence was just about to shock everyone, but in real life, the history of that evidence started years ago, when a boy named Garrison chose not to let silence prevail. Garrison was always considered to be one of the quieter Brown children, more introverted, less in the limelight. Fans would call him the quiet one, somebody who steered clear of family turmoil. But that wasn't the whole picture. Behind the cameras, Garrison was constructing a life nobody knew he had. He sought military service. He worked diligently to become self-sufficient, and he kept scrupulous records of his endeavors. Contrary to his father, who more or less freelanced on the family name and TLC checks, Garrison prized accountability and structure. But here's the surprise. There were also wounds that he bore that were deep. Wounds from being disregarded. Wounds from being silenced. Wounds from watching his father constantly favor one home over the other. Those were the wounds that fueled him to maintain details, dialogues, and proofs that someday could need to be disclosed. That day arrived finally, in the most dramatic context imaginable. A courtroom confrontation. The courtroom could be where Garrison Brown's hidden existence was laid bare, but the narrative of who he was in reality started years ago, far from the cameras, far from the spotlight, and far from the relentlessly crafted world. Kody and Robyn attempted to peddle to the public. To appreciate why the courtroom gasped when his evidence was revealed, you must appreciate the man behind the demure smile. Garrison Brown was born in turmoil, a world already controlled by cameras, public scrutiny, and a father pulled thin between wives and children. He was one of many faces in the sea of siblings from the very start. Unlike Kody, who lived for attention, Garrison never asked for the spotlight. He wasn't the loudest son, nor the one whose face appeared constantly in confessionals. He fit into the background, quiet but perceptive. To many fans, he was just another one of Janelle's kids. But what individuals didn't observe was that Garrison saw everything. He saw the way his father's time was spent unevenly. He saw how his mother, Janelle, shouldered the bulk of responsibility without notice. He saw how the family image outside public view never paralleled their inner conflicts. From a young age, he was quietly documenting those imbalances in his head. As he matured, Garrison yearned for autonomy. He did not wish to survive off of the unstable framework of his family, or the group's income. Rather, he yearned for discipline, motivation, and a sense of affiliation beyond the Brown surname. This is what attracted him to the military. The army was all his home life was not ordered, structured, accountable. It provided him with an identity of his own beyond being Kody Brown's son. It provided him with pride and purpose. And in a way, it was his sanctuary. A place where he could establish himself without being overwhelmed by his father's overbearing presence. But even as he constructed this new existence, he couldn't shake the ghosts of his family. He was still bound to a father who continued to disregard him, a mother who quietly endured, and a home life where Robyn's kids were more important than he was. The actual breaking point for Garrison occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. As the world grappled with lockdowns, the Brown family exploded. Kody had a strict rule system, rules that appeared to conveniently enable him to spend almost all of his time with Robyn and her kids, and moving further away from the rest of the family. This wasn't just unfair for Garrison, it was personal. He was a young man attempting to live his life, work, socialize, and gain independence. But each time he attempted to reconnect with his father, he was greeted with excuses. Kody said it was due to safety, but to Garrison it was obviously a matter of priorities. In a tearful showdown, Garrison blamed Kody for leaving his children behind for Robyn's home. Viewers recall the vehemence of his tone, the anguish in his voice. What they could not observe, though, was how deeply this rejection hurt him. The pandemic not only kept him physically apart from his father, it also cut what little emotional bond they had left. But that's where Garrison's tale really becomes incredible. Rather than striking out blindly, he started gathering the truth quietly. Each phone call, each financial statement, each casual remark, he treated them as pieces of a puzzle. He understood that someday the lie Kody and Robyn told would be shattered. And when that happened, he needed the truth to ring louder than any "I didn't do it." Why did he do this? Some believe it was anger, but those closest to him thought it was justice, not for him alone, but for all of the siblings who had been silenced. Garrison was not irresponsible. He was careful. He became the unassuming archivist of the Brown family's life. Another aspect of Garrison's covert life was the friendships he formed outside the Brown bubble. Unlike many of his siblings who were held to the family name, Garrison consciously created a group of friends who had nothing to do with polygamy, reality television, or the Brown name. These people were his adopted family, individuals who knew him for who he was, not for the drama surrounding his last name. It was by way of these friendships that he was strengthened. They urged him to say his truth, to cease keeping silent behind, and to see his own worth outside of his father's sanction. These external relationships afforded him insight, and they provided him with the courage to finally present his evidence. However much independence he discovered, the scars of favoritism never healed. For years, Garrison sat idly by, as Kody invested his time, energy and resources into Robyn's home. Birthdays, milestones, emotional support, it all seemed to go one way, while Janelle's kids had to compete for scraps of attention. For a son like Garrison, who had struggled so much to be respected, the favoritism cut deeper than words could ever say. He didn't crave handouts. He didn't desire special favors. He merely wanted recognition, something Kody refused to do. This feeling of being constantly overshadowed motivated his quest to record the reality, because if his father wouldn't respect him, Garrison would ensure evidence did. The dual life. By the time he was grown, Garrison was leading a double life. Publicly was the polite, beaming son of Janelle, making the occasional appearance on Sister Wives, infrequently stirring up trouble. To viewers he was nice but largely invisible. Privately was a forceful young man, who had established a career, a network of close friends, and a secret cache of family gossip. This dual nature both underestimated him and made him formidable. While Kody wrote him off as another disobedient child, Garrison was secretly setting up the truth that would eventually destroy his father's tale. So when courtroom time came and Garrison's proof was finally revealed, it wasn't random, it wasn't unexpected, it was the product of years of watchfulness, hurt, and preparation. The books showed favoritism. The tapes revealed neglect. The personal musings revealed the emotional cost of growing up in a household where your voice didn't carry. And in that moment, the quiet son became the loudest truth teller. But let's hold up here, because it's simple enough to cast Garrison's tale as one of rebellion or payback. The reality is much more human. At his core, Garrison wasn't trying to destroy his family. He wasn't seeking fame or attention. What he wanted was simple: acknowledgement, respect, love from a father who should have given it freely, but withheld it cruelly. That's why his tale speaks so intensely to the hearts of fans. Because it's not merely about polygamy, or reality television, or money trails. It's about a son who wanted to count, whose pain he wanted acknowledged, and whose truth he did not let become buried. So who in fact was Garrison Brown? He was not simply a supporting character on a reality television series. He was an abandoned son, a structure-seeking soldier, a friend who created his own family, and finally a truth teller who would not let silence prevail. He was subdued, yes, but his reserve wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was power. It was the restraint of a man who knew the time would arrive when the world would finally hear his version of events. And when that time arrived, the aftershocks weren't felt in just a courtroom, but in the hearts of every fan who ever questioned whether or not the children of Sister Wives were really all right. Now Garrison's tale is a legacy of grit. He was not always the loudest Brown, or the most popular, or the most camera-friendly, but ultimately he became the one who made the greatest mark. His willingness to keep evidence, to document what was true, and to bring it forward at last made all the difference. For Kody and Robyn, it was humiliation. For Christine, Janelle, and Meri, it was vindication. And for the viewers, it was verification that sometimes the quietest voices say the loudest truths. When the pile of papers, recordings, and financial records was presented, the mood changed in an instant. Early on, Kody rested back in his chair, assured, even condescending. Robyn gripped his arm in a tight hold, whispering reassurances. But when the evidence came out, their faces transformed from placid to appalled. The first bombshell was the financial records. They provided out-of-the-ordinary money trails, funds that appeared to accrue to Robyn's household out of proportion to Janelle's or Christine's. It wasn't merely favoritism, it appeared to be systematic funneling. Then came the private chatter. Garrison's tapes captured the raw anguish of a son who felt rejected. In one particularly heart-wrenching snippet, Garrison was heard telling, "Dad treats us like we don't exist. It's like Robyn's children are the only children that matter. But I'm holding on to this, because eventually people will have to listen to the truth." The last one was the clincher, an audio clip where Garrison stated, "They can hide behind cameras and lies, but the truth comes out, and when it does, it's going to blow the facade away." The room gasped. The reporters wrote furiously. Christine and Janelle appeared both devastated and vindicated. Kody? He sat there in shocked silence, his jaw locked. Robyn was openly weeping, shaking her head in denial. The courtroom strained. Journalists leaned forward, pens at the ready. Relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Kody Brown, typically the man who dominated the spotlight, sat rigid, jaw locked, his golden ringlets surrounding a face that seemed much less assured than usual. By his side, Robyn held a tissue, her eyes jumping wildly. And then it was done. The judge nodded. A pile of files, fat with years of history, landed on the desk. The room seemed to reverberate as everyone understood. This was not rumor. This was not guesswork. This was proof. Hard, irrefutable proof. For the very first time, the reality of that hidden life of Garrison Brown was going to be exposed, and the effect would rock Kody and Robyn to their core. Initially, Kody still had that air of arrogance about him. He slouched back, arms crossed, defying anyone to challenge him. In his head, he was above it all. He'd spent years brushing aside accusations, gaslighting his former wives, and manipulating the story to suit himself and Robyn. But as the lawyer raised the first file, all that confidence started to crack. The initial document wasn't sensational. It was a spreadsheet, columns and rows of numbers. It appeared dull at first glance, but the attorney started to describe, and jaws fell. The figures spoke for themselves, and no amount of spin could remove them. Bank statements showed how over the course of a number of years, out-of-balance amounts of family money were directed into Robyn's household. Mortgage payments, babysitting fees, shopping bills, even high-end purchases, all seriously one-sided. While Janelle and Christine were scrounging to get by for their kids, Robyn's side of the family prospered. Paper trail was irrefutable. And this is the clincher. Garrison had kept copies of these financial statements under wraps, knowing they might someday need to be produced. Christine gasped out loud. Janelle hung her head, her lips compressing tightly. Fans who later read it online would mutter, "We knew it. We always knew Robyn was the favorite." But seeing it in black and white is something else. Kody's face turned red with embarrassment. He stuttered that everything was taken out of context. But the lawyer merely smiled and said, "Numbers don't lie, Mr. Brown." If the trail of money shook the courtroom, the subsequent revelation shattered it. A small machine was deposited on the table, a recording. The lawyer pushed the play button, and before long, the courtroom was filled with the unmistakable voice of Garrison Brown. "I feel invisible to him. It's like we don't matter. Everything goes to Robyn and her kids, and he doesn't even try to hide it anymore." The raw emotion in his voice sliced through the hush like a knife. Another clip was played. "Mom deserves better. We all do. But if he won't admit it, then one day, I'll make sure the truth gets out." Gasps filled the room. Even journalists, disciplined to stay calm, traded stunned looks. And then the worst cut of all came. They may hide behind lies and cameras, but always the truth is revealed. And when it is, they can no longer hide behind their deceptions. The words resonated in the room. It was the sound of a ghost, a chilling reminder of all that the children had suffered. Kody's demeanor crumpled. The previously confident patriarch now resembled a man trapped. Robyn cried out openly, her hands shaking as she covered her face. The effect was instant. Christine sat up straighter, her eyes welling up with tears. For years she'd attempted to describe this very dynamic. Now her son's words confirmed everything. Janelle muttered to herself, nearly a prayer. He was right. He was right all along. Meri, as quiet as ever, both looked devastated and vindicated. She too had been victimized by Kody's favoritism, sidelined while Robyn took center stage. Even the judge looked emotional,
taking a pause before he could ask the courtroom to quiet down. Evidence was unequivocal. Garrison hadn't merely talked. He recorded, preserved, and made sure the truth would one day be told. Just when things could not have gone worse for Kody and Robyn, yet another item of evidence came up. A personal diary maintained by Garrison. There he wrote about times of rejection in agonized detail. Journals of forgotten birthdays, scribbled notes of fights with his father, writings on how he felt invisible in his own family's history. One read, "He says he loves us all the same, but actions speak louder than words. I don't think he even looks at me anymore. Sometimes I wonder if he ever did." The courtroom fell silent, except for the sound of Robyn's stifled sobs. Kody's defense falls apart. Naturally, Kody attempted to retaliate. He alleged that the court had invaded his privacy. He called Garrison just bitter and out of control. But the evidence was piled too high. The documents, the recordings, the journal, they all created the same incriminating picture. For once, Kody couldn't bluff his way out. His words, so commonly used to deceive, didn't fly. The truth was too audible. Robyn attempted to defend him, crying that people didn't understand the full story. But the more she protested, the more hollow it sounded. The evidence spoke for itself. Outside the courtroom, the revelations spread like wildfire. News outlets reported the details. Social media erupted. Fans who had followed the family for over a decade were stunned yet oddly vindicated.
Comments flooded online. "This is what we've been saying for years. Kody's favoritism tore that family apart. And now it's on the record. Garrison deserved better." They all did. Public sympathy fell strongly to the children, and in particular to Garrison, whose bravery to uphold the truth had uncovered what many knew but couldn't demonstrate. The emotional cost within the family. The harm was irreparable. Christine cried for the hurt of her son. Janelle grappled with shame, questioning whether she might have done something to save him. Meri, while usually remote, looked destroyed beneath it all. But Kody, he was stubborn, refusing to acknowledge fault. His ego wouldn't permit it. Robyn held on to him, the two of them remote in their mutual denial. But no matter how much they ranted and raved, the evidence had already testified. Their credibility was ruined. Their reputation as the last stable couple was in tatters. Why the evidence mattered at its core. This wasn't about money or prejudice. It was about truth. For years the family story had been dictated by Kody and Robyn. They painted themselves on the show, interviews, and in the public eye as victims of jealous wives and ungrateful children. But Garrison's evidence pulled back that veil. The records demonstrated favoritism. The tapes uncovered neglect. The diary disclosed heartbreak. As a family, they lived a tale no one could dispute. A father leaving his children for one home, and a son who would not allow that tale to be forgotten. The Browns were in shambles by the time court recessed. Kody stormed out, his temper barely within control. Robyn trailed behind, her face smeared with tears. Christine and Janelle hung back, silently drinking in the significance of what they had just witnessed. For them, it was a painful validation of all they had gone through. The media rushed in, clamoring for comments. Christine spoke softly. "He wanted the truth heard, that's all." And in those few simple words, she said it all. The legacy of the evidence. Garrison might not have been the most vocal member of the Brown family, but ultimately, his testimony trumpeted louder than anything Kody and Robyn could ever utter. The courtroom did not merely listen to papers and tape, it listened to the voice of a child silenced for far too long. It heard the agony of favoritism, the wounds of neglect, and the internal strength of an individual who dared not allow lies to prevail. For the Browns, the proof was a bomb that blew up their reputation. For the public, it was proof of what they already believed. And for Garrison, it was a last, irrefutable act of truth-telling. The courtroom was quiet, but the resonance of Garrison's words still lingered in the air. His words, recorded, written in journals, corroborated by irrefutable documents, had destroyed the illusion that Kody and Robyn had worked so hard to preserve. The judge's gavel came down once, calling for a brief recess. But the Brown family, there was no break. What had been done could not be erased. And as family members stood up from their seats, as whispers circulated through the room, the reality set in. This was no longer one secret life. This was about one family torn apart under the world's microscope. Christine was the first to rise. Her face was white, but her eyes blazed with a strange combination of sorrow and vindication. For years, she had been relegated to the role of the bitter wife who couldn't cope with polygamy. She had been characterized as jealous, unreasonable, melodramatic. But now, her son's voice had substantiated everything she had attempted to communicate. She spoke softly, as if to herself, "He did tell the truth. My boy told the truth." Next to her, Janelle folded her hands into fists so hard her knuckles were white. The proof had torn open wounds she had fought so hard to keep hidden. She had seen her children struggle under the weight of Kody's indifference. And now, in black and white, in audio tapes and diaries, the world saw it too. Her lips trembled as she muttered, "I should have done more. I should have protected him better." And then there was Meri. Always the outsider, always the one relegated to the periphery. She sat in her chair, still, her face inscrutable, but under her stoic exterior was heartbreak. She was familiar with favoritism. She knew what it felt like to be wiped away. And listening to Garrison's journal entries, words of loneliness and exclusion, was like reading from her own unspoken diary. For these women, the courtroom testimony wasn't about Garrison. It was about all of them. About years of gaslighting, about seeing their children grow up with a father who played favorites, while proclaiming he didn't. The hurt was fresh, but the validation was certain. Kody's fury and Robyn's collapse across the aisle. Kody was a storm barely contained. His body trembled with rage as he slammed a hand on the table, muttering to his attorney. His face was crimson, his jaw clenched. For years he had been the one in control, the one with the final word. But in this courtroom, with evidence stacked against him, his power crumbled. Lies. He spat, his words echoing through the room. All of it lies. But nobody believed him. The figures, the tapes, the diaries, they were not rumors. They were not the grievances of disgruntled wives. They were facts. And the more Kody protested, the more desperate he appeared. Across from him, Robyn completely lost it. Seeps ran down her face as she covered her face with her hands. She had been Kody's firewall, his co-conspirator in manufacturing the truth, for years. But now that the facts exposed the financial favoritism and the emotional abandonment, she was speechless. The firewall she and Kody had constructed was crumbling stone by stone, and all she could do was cry in shock. The children's divide, but the hurt did not end with the wives. The Brown children, previously a unit held together by the vision of family first, were now in the midst of a hurricane of betrayal and sorrow. Several of Garrison's brothers and sisters sat stone-faced, their faces reflecting shattered hearts. Some whispered furiously, shaking heads in disbelief as reality set in. Others had tears streaming down their faces. He'd battled among themselves for years, some coming to Kody's defense, others denouncing him. The favoritism had created divisions within siblings, who should have been a unit. And now with the courtroom testimony, the fissures burst wide open. A child grumbled, "He picked Robyn's children over us." Another whispered resentfully, "And he still won't own up to it." The rift wasn't between parents and children anymore. It was between the siblings themselves. Some attempted to stand up for Kody, saying the tapes didn't show the whole picture. Others furiously pushed back, citing the accounting records as evidence. The family wasn't merely fractured, it was imploding in front of them. Outside the courthouse, the fallout spread like wildfire. News outlets covered every detail. Headlines screamed about favoritism, financial secrets, and emotional neglect. Social media lit up with outrage, sympathy, and vindication. Fans who had followed the Brown family for over a decade unleashed a tidal wave of reactions. "This is heartbreaking. Garrison's truth deserved to be heard." Kody always tried to paint himself as the victim. Now the mask is off. Robyn can cry all she wants, but the evidence doesn't lie. The Browns were no longer TV curiosities. They were front-page material. Their private chaos had become public scandal, and no PR spin could keep it bottled up. The rift between truth and denial. Within the courtroom, the tension boiled over. Christine and Janelle wept openly, mourning not just the evidence, but the years of silence that had preceded it. Meri sat stiff, her silence screaming louder than any words. But Kody, he refused to yield. Even in the face of overwhelming proof, he clung to denial. "This is twisted," he shouted, his voice echoing off the courtroom walls. "You're all trying to destroy me." But the reality was, Kody wasn't being destroyed by everybody. He was being destroyed by the proof of his own behavior. Robyn attempted to mellow out his rants, holding his arm, begging him to let it go. But her tears merely fueled fire for critics who viewed her as the mastermind behind favoritism. The courtroom was no longer merely a forum for legal testimony. It was a battlefield of actuality against denial, of children who had experienced the neglect and parents who would not acknowledge it. When the recess was over, the family resumed sitting their places, but the harm was already done. No one saw the others in the same light. Christine's face was smeared with tears, but her countenance was firm. Janelle hugged herself tightly, as if binding her heart in place. Meri stared at the floor, her silence more condemning than any words. Kody fumed across the room, his rage thick. Robyn wiped her eyes, her complexion clammy, her body shaking. The kids sat scattered, no longer one big family, but shards of a shattered dream. The truth had been told, the evidence had been testified, and the repercussions were destroying the Browns piecemeal. Some deeper issue than money or favoritism lay at the heart of this catastrophe. It was betrayal. These wives had sacrificed decades of their lives to a man who had promised them equality and brought them division. These children had been raised thinking they were members of one family, only to learn they had been favored, ranked, and cast aside. The courtroom testimony didn't only confirm financial tampering, it revealed the emotional abandonment that had left them all battered. And when it is betrayal from those supposed to safeguard you, wounds are deepest. As the session closed, the Browns limped out of the courtroom, but they were not the same family who had entered. Christine and Janelle moved side by side, in silence but in shared sorrow and vindication. Meri brought up the rear, her face inscrutable. Kody blew out, hands balled into fists, his anger emanating from him. Robyn trailed behind, breaking under the burden of tears. The kids ran off in all directions, some towards their mothers, the rest stranded in the melee. The vision of one large happy family, a vision that had powered the show, the interviews, the public image, was torn apart into a million pieces. The trial had brought out the truth, but it also brought out how thoroughly the family was split. And while the world's eyes were upon them, one question hung in the air. Would the Browns ever be able to recover from this? The effect of Garrison's evidence didn't end at the courtroom doors. The Brown family, already broken, broke further apart. It was bittersweet vindication for Christine and Janelle. They had expressed concerns about Kody's favoritism and control for so long. Now, with Garrison's evidence, they no longer had to explain their emotions. The world saw it for what it was. For Meri, it was a painful reminder of how disposable she had been to Kody. Though she sat quietly through the proceedings, her face spoke volumes of years spent trying to cling to a marriage already lost. But for Robyn and Kody, it was heartbreak. Their reputation as the last stable couple was ruined. Their efforts at spinning the story fell apart under the gravity of Garrison's words. And with the public now in the know, restoring that reputation seemed next to impossible. The gavel fell one final time. Bang. The judge's tone was even, but the words rang with finality. This court is adjourned. And like that, the hearing was done. But for the Browns, the war had just started. The courtroom had adjourned for the day, but the reverberations of the evidence, the recordings, the books, the journal would echo through their lives forever. What comes next? That was the question hanging in the air. For the wives, for the children, for Kody and Robyn, for the millions of fans who had watched this family rise and fall on television screens for over a decade. The courtroom had exposed the truth. Now the world was watching the fallout. Christine emerged from the courtroom slowly, her gait slow but her head held high. She was surrounded by reporters, thrusting microphones and cameras into her face. For a moment she did not speak, and then in a soft but strong voice, she spoke. Garrison wanted the truth to be heard. That's all. He deserves that. Her words were plain, yet they bore the sting of a mother's pride and pain. Christine had battled for years to keep her children safe, with Kody calling her dramatic, emotional, even selfish. But now the world was seeing what she knew all along. Her son was telling the truth. Over the next few days, Christine relied on her children. She cooked meals with them. She stayed up late listening,
comforting and reassuring. She was the only parent left holding them together. But within her she had a storm: grief for what her son went through, guilt for not stopping him sooner, and anger at Kody for not being able to see the harm he had done. But there was also a blaze in her. The courtroom had vindicated her, and she was not going to let the vindication be wasted. Christine swore to herself silently she would never again let her children's voices be silenced. For Janelle, the aftermath was more subdued, but no less anguish. She returned home that evening and sat at her kitchen table, looking at the financial records spread out in court. Figures that confirmed her children had been treated as less than, papers that proved the disparity she had sensed for so long. She reflected on the moment she had kept quiet for peace sake, on the moment she had said to her children, "Wait patiently, try harder, just let Dad sort this out." And now, lying in black and white before her, she felt a pang of regret. But Janelle was not one to brood for long. Her sorrow soon converted into determination. She started planning, getting her own funds in order, disengaging totally from Kody's control, and assisting her kids to do the same. For Janelle, the aftermath was all about establishing independence. If the trial had taught her anything, it was that Kody's leadership was poisonous, and she was set on establishing a future where her children no longer needed him in any form. Meri was more difficult to decipher. In the days following the trial, she dodged reporters, turned down interviews, and retreated into herself. But the people around her saw something change. She was more distant, more detached than ever before. It was like that courtroom testimony had cemented what she must have always suspected. She was never really a part of this family. Meri had suffered through years of rejection, years of standing on the sidelines as Kody lavished his love and attention on others, and she was left in solitude. And listening to Garrison's words, the journal writings, the voice messages of invisibility, had felt like reliving it all herself. The only difference was, Garrison had struggled to create a record of his reality. Meri never did. And so, behind the scenes, Meri started thinking about her own future. The aftermath for her wasn't reconciliation or rebuilding. It was finally escaping a family that had shattered her years ago. While Christine, Janelle, and even Meri started heading towards independence, Kody and Robyn fell back into denial. They filed out of the courtroom in embarrassment, jeered by passers-by who called out, "Shame on you," and listened to your children. Journalists attempted to get responses from them, but Kody pushed through in anger, his face contorted, while Robyn cried quietly into her hands. Behind closed doors, their house became an excuse fortress. Kody ranted about betrayal, that the wives had plotted against him. He called the recordings manipulated, and the papers taken out of context. Robyn held fast to him, claiming the world was conspiring against them. Yet in private, even she couldn't deny the proof. The truth had been uttered, and no matter how diligently they attempted to redefine the tale, the harm could never be undone. They were cut off, not only from the ex-wives, but from the children as well. Brothers and sisters who had long endured their father's favoritism, now expressed open disdain for him. And the more Kody protested, the more isolated he felt. For the children, the fallout was perhaps the most difficult of all. Some experienced relief that the secret was at last out. Others were angry that it had taken so long. Others grappled with mixed emotions, faithfulness to their father battling up against the indisputable proof of neglect. Family get-togethers became practically impossible. Divisions were made among siblings who stood by Kody and those who judged him. Fights broke out in group messages. Silence crept where laughter had once thrived. One heartbreaking moment came when a sibling reportedly said, "I don't even know if we're a family anymore." And that was the real tragedy. The courtroom hadn't just exposed Kody and Robyn's favoritism, it had exposed the irreparable cracks in the Brown family itself. Meanwhile, the world outside the Browns' private turmoil was captivated. Headlines blazed with the news of the scandal. Talk shows analyzed the trial theatrics. Fans inundated social media with tweets such as #Justice for Garrison and #Truth Exposed. The Browns were no longer reality television celebrities. They were a warning. And the public was split. Some still felt sympathy for Kody and Robyn, but the greater weight of opinion damned them for the favoritism, the denial, and the suffering their children had suffered. The media frenzy only made things worse. Kody and Robyn attempted to pull back, but the glare traveled with them. Christine and Janelle, on the other hand, were being feted for their courage and integrity. as their fans rallied to their cause.
Garrison's legacy was at the eye of the storm. His words, his albums, his braveness and holding on to the truth, even if nobody appeared to be listening, had altered everything. For his sisters, it was a reminder that their voices were heard. For his mothers, it was vindication that they weren't insane, that the favoritism and neglect they experienced were real. For Kody and Robyn, it was a reckoning that they could never shake. And for the world, it was a lesson: the truth always emerges, no matter how expertly concealed. What happens now? So, what now? The Browns are standing alone in the wreckage of their own creation. Christine is on the move, dedicated to healing her children. Janelle is building self-reliance, determined to leave the dysfunction behind. Meri is slowly getting ready to leave for good. The children are broken, but a few are discovering strength and solidarity, relying on one another as they try to make sense of the chaos. And what about Kody and Robyn? They are alone, stuck in denial, holding on to one another as the world gets smaller. The Brown family's future is unclear. But this much is certain: the courtroom altered everything. The evidence revealed the deceptions. The truth dismantled the fantasy. And the family that once pretended to be solid is now more fractured than ever. As the dust settles, one chilling idea stays with all of us who tracked this drama. The Browns constructed their world on the bond of togetherness, of one family under one roof. And then in the end, it was a son's unobtrusive bravery, his journal, his recordings, his honesty, that shattered their world. And maybe that is this trial's real legacy. Not only the collapse of Kody and Robyn's meticulously constructed reputation, but the ascension of a new reality, that voices once forbidden will always eventually be heard. The hearing was over, but the saga wasn't. There were reporters thronging the courthouse. Christine fought back tears as she addressed cameras. Garrison deserved to be heard. He deserved better. Janelle, shaken, continued. His voice matters, and I hope this finally makes people understand what he went through. For viewers, it was a wake-up call. The Brown clan wasn't simply a reality show phenomenon anymore. It was a warning about how control, favoritism, and denial can destroy even the most public of families. And at the heart of it all was Garrison, a young man whose understated strength and choice to keep records ensured the truth could not be buried. The courtroom had closed its doors. But the Browns' story was far from finished. In ways, the trial wasn't the conclusion of their saga in any sense. Rather, it was the opening of an entirely new and still more uncertain chapter. For a family that had initially vowed to have unity, love, and togetherness under the flag of plural marriage, the wake of Garrison's findings brought into question the most macabre question to date. Would the Browns rebuild, or would they finally fall apart irreparably? During the days that immediately followed the trial, there was silence from the Browns. There were no collective statements, no family press conference, no cozy Instagram updates, guaranteeing supporters that they were working through it. Silence did all the speaking. Christine and Janelle pulled back into the sanctuary of their kids, keeping clear of the cameras, instead centering on dinner time, late-night discussions, and recovery. Meri disappeared nearly completely, only popping up in cryptic social media posts, declaring choosing peace over pain. Kody and Robyn, on the other hand, drew the drapes closer. The home, once the center hub of family gatherings, was now a fortress. Shadows behind drawn blinds, muffled sounds of fights heard by neighbors, paparazzi shooting photos of Kody storming in and out with fists clenched and angry eyes. The world had witnessed the proof. The ensuing silence was almost as deafening as the revelations themselves. For Christine, the fallout was less about revenge and more about survival. She was aware of the cameras rolling, reporters waiting outside, and fans clamoring for her side. But Christine's focus wasn't on interviews. It was on her children. She arranged for therapy sessions, hikes with family, and Sunday dinner gatherings. She wanted to recreate what Kody destroyed: a sense of safety, belonging, and love. Her new mantra became evident: we may not be whole as a family anymore, but we can be whole as ourselves. In the background, reality network producers hovered like vultures, eager to ride her path of independence. Christine rejected many of them, but rumors are that she is eyeing a new show, one about healing and resilience, not polygamy. For her, Section 6 of this saga wasn't about reliving the pain. It was about writing a new story. Janelle's mind was practical, always the numbers person.
always the steady presence. She started untangling herself from years of financial entanglement with Kody. The courtroom papers had revealed where the cash went, and where it didn't. Now Janelle was determined to set her children's futures free from Kody's control. She hired counselors, rewired her accounts, and steered her kids toward independence. Friends say she's discovered a new spark, a quiet fire that doesn't come from anger, but from clarity. For years Janelle practiced compromise. Now she practices boundaries. Her kids, taking cues from her strength, have now started to look at her not only as their mother, but as a leader. For them, Janelle is evidence that no matter what, you can restructure things in your life. Meri's path followed a different route. For months she had held out the slim possibility of reconciliation with Kody, despite the world's assurances that it would never happen. But the courtroom testimony had been the last nail in the coffin of delusion. Listening to Garrison's words, his cry for acknowledgement, his pain at being invisible, was to look into her own heart. For the first time, Meri acknowledged to herself that she was finished. She set out on the road, chronicling her journeys with enigmatic posts such as "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." She avoided family gatherings, preferring isolation to agonizing reunions. Whispers around town have it that Meri is secretly working on a tell-all, her side of the story, unvarnished, uncut, and incriminating. Whatever the case may be, one thing is sure: Meri is no longer holding out for Kody. Her tale is hers now. If the other wives were gaining strength through distance, Kody and Robyn were sinking in denial. They issued a quick statement weeks after the trial, stating the evidence was misleading, and blaming the media for sensationalism. But it rang hollow. The recordings couldn't be deleted. The papers couldn't be discredited. The journal couldn't be incinerated from memory. Kody became angrier, more resentful. In one of the leaked videos, he raged at having been betrayed by his own family, slapping his fist on the table, his voice trembling with fury. Robyn sat next to him, her tears streaming, her hand holding onto his arm like a lifeline. But even among their own allies, skepticism had set in. The cracks in their believability ran too deep. Every effort at spin resulted in backfiring, giving rise to greater backlash, more memes, more public ridicule. The formerly proud patriarch was now a laughingstock, and Robyn, the formerly considered sweet, soft-spoken peacemaker, now came across as the mastermind behind favoritism. Their cocoon of isolation thickened by the day. The children's new reality. The children were probably the most broken of them all. Some stuck with their mothers, drawing strength from solidarity. Others had conflicted loyalties, torn between love for their dad and the pain of betrayal. Family functions were strained, often skipped entirely. Birthdays were broken celebrations, one set celebrating with Christine and Janelle, another silently standing with Kody and Robyn. The now distant haphazard assemblies of the Browns no longer existed. Instead, there was a broken system of people, each struggling on their own with their own loss, their own recovery, their own reality. And through it all, Garrison's voice remained. His music, his voice, his legacy. The kids couldn't help it. Some welcomed it, others resented it, but all couldn't help but hear it. The circus only grew. Documentaries were sold, books were written, friends and neighbors were interviewed. The Browns no longer were just a family on reality television. They were cultural cautionary tales, icons of what happens when denial, favoritism, and control can consume a family from the inside out. But for each headline, each trending topic, there was still a beating heart of sorrow. The Browns weren't celebrities, they were individuals, and the wounds of the courtroom were real, raw, and deep. Rebuilding or ruin. For Christine, the road ahead is healing. For Janelle, it's autonomy. For Meri, it's closure. For the children, it's survival. But for Robyn and Kody, the way ahead is much less certain. Do they double up on denial and further insulate themselves? Or do they, for the first time ever, confront the truth? The answer to date remains a ghostly enigma. What is sure is this: the Brown family as the world used to know it is gone. The unity dream has shattered. The curtain has been pulled off, and the world is left gawking at the wreckage of a family that constructed their dynasty on quicksand. Ultimately, Section 6 isn't for the courtroom or even the evidence. It's about what happens when truth meets denial, when secrets are exposed by a family, and when silence is no longer possible. And so, the question stands. Will the Browns rebuild from the ashes of their own making? Or is this it, the end? Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure. The world is watching. So what does it all mean? It signifies the very carefully crafted image of Kody and Robyn as the survivors of sister wives being destroyed. It signifies the children's voices too often silenced on television, now being heard loud and clear. And above all, it signifies Garrison's legacy forever being connected to the strength of revealing the truth. For years the fans had suspected bias. For years the wives had complained of manipulation. For years children grumbled in silence. But now, with undeniable proof exposed in court, those suspicions are no longer guesswork. They're fact. The Brown family will never be the same. The viewers will never see them the same. And no matter how hard Kody and Robyn work to restore their reputation, the last word will always be heard ringing back to Garrison's eerie message. The truth will come out. And when it does, they won't be able to hide behind their lies anymore. And that, dear fans, is precisely what transpired.